Hello, everybody. My name is Lexi Malico. I'm president of the Graduate Student Association. I am lucky enough to be joined here today by the GSA Executive Board. If they want to just give a little wave with the reactions to say hello.
Hey, guys.
I'm also joined by Darian Dixon, president of the Black Graduate Student Association. If he wants to just say a quick hi.
Hello. Welcome, everybody.
And of course, our keynote speaker today, Dr. Peter Harries, will be joining us to discuss everything going on and how it's going to affect the graduate students at NC State, the graduate school, and life as we know it right now. So, Dean Harries, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lexi, and thank you, Darian, and thank you, everybody else, for taking the time to attend this town hall today. I want to start with saying I wish we had all the answers, but we don't. I think as everybody realizes, this is really an unprecedented time in many ways. I mean, we're facing basically what I consider to be three pandemics. We have one that is health related, one that is economically related, and one that is predicated on systemic racism that has impacted so many aspects of our country and including our university environment. And I think this represents an incredibly interesting yet difficult time in that there's no real playbook to go by. We've never faced, at least not since 1918, a pandemic before. Obviously we have Zoom, so we can do things in a lot different ways than was possible almost a century ago. But still, I think there are so many challenges associated with every aspect of this. And, you know, something that I tell you today could be completely different by this evening, in a week's time, in a month's time, by the time classes start, because frankly, no one really knows what the situation is going to look like a week from now, a month from now, and how that's going to influence decisions that are made about what the university looks like and how we function. So I'm certainly pledging to do my best to answer any questions that you might have, but I think we all need to realize that given the fluidity of this situation and given the lack of a playbook, that how and what we discuss today, once again, could be very different going forward. And I think we're all certainly hoping for a vaccine as quickly as possible, as that would take care of the health part of this, but how you vaccinate an entire globe is an interesting question in and of itself. And, hopefully the economic solutions would follow quickly after that. And I think, I think the most difficult issue that we're going to have to grapple with, quite frankly, is the racial one, and how we continue to address that situation on this campus. So I really want this to be more about questions than me talking on and on. I could do that, but at this point, I'd really like to turn the floor over to you and what concerns you may have. And I think, at least to get us started, I think the idea is that people would enter questions in the chat. And Lexi, I'm assuming you're sort of going to moderate that chat?
Indeed, that is the plan. So if you have any questions that you'd like for Dr. Harries to answer, please submit them in the chat and I can direct. So without further ado, if there are any questions from students who would like information, please go ahead, put them in the chat. We had a couple of submissions, so I'm just going to kind of get started with this, which is what is the plan currently for the fall semester in relation to COVID-19?
Well, I would say currently the plan is that classes will start in some form on August 10th. There will be no fall break, and we will end basically with exams and everything the Friday before Thanksgiving week. The notion is basically if we can hopefully get people on campus safely, that by creating a relatively closed community that we can retain that. I mean, once again, everything is going to be predicated on the data that exists. I mean, that is currently the plan, but it could change pretty quickly.
Thank you. So we have a question, which is, how will students receive hazard pay if required to be present?
In terms of the hazard pay, I mean, at this point, the university, I mean, the system office has removed all hazard pay. There is no one is being paid any hazard pay at this point. So that's really not, I don't think that'll be reconsidered. And at this point, you know, there was about 6 weeks where hazard pay was being given out, but that has currently ceased.
So what is the latest in regards to the reopening of the labs? I know many students are involved in research on campus.
Yeah, and so that process has largely been coordinated through the associate deans for research and the research office. There's several phases to that process. And right now, the requirement is basically that everyone have the necessary PPE that their lab requires. And at least for research, the mask requirement was in place prior to the one that will be in place as of July 1st for campus. There was also a space requirement that, to a certain degree, I mean, the overall initial space requirement was that in order to be in a lab, there needed to be at least 250 square feet of floor space for students or for anybody working in the lab. That has been reduced to 200 feet. But once again, that is very much controlled by how the lab functions. For instance, if there are people moving from one station to another, there may be a greater space requirement to accommodate that. So that is being, once again, overseen by the research deans within individual colleges in conjunction with the research office. At this point, though, what is still in place is that any research that can be done remotely should continue in that remote mode. And so really this is only, I mean, at this point, for basically lab work that is required to continue research activity. If we move to a different phase, then that footprint would probably be reduced somewhat. But once again, that will be dependent upon the particulars within a given lab. And you know, given what's happening in terms of COVID cases within North Carolina, I don't necessarily see that we're moving to that next phase anytime soon.
Thank you. So one of the next questions that came into the chat was, are there any plans for leniency in grades for the fall semester?
So yeah, and that's been decided. The same basically mode of allowing flexibility for students will exist in the fall. So you will have the ability to drop a class, even after grades have rolled. It can be also converted to SU. And so that same flexibility that existed for the spring and the summer will exist in the fall as well.
And so, speaking a bit more on the class issue, what are the plans in terms of online versus in person?
I think, this has been, I think, one of the hardest issues in terms of balancing all of the issues that are in place. My understanding is that that there was initial go around through this, and that was prior to the mask requirement and also some changes that occurred at the system level that allowed an increase in class size from a maximum of 50 to 100, largely due to the mask requirements. I mean, that still doesn't mean that students will be sitting shoulder to shoulder in any room. The university has basically taken over all the space in McKimmon, and I believe also in Tally, and in various sort of theater settings, like in Witherspoon, to increase the footprint of teaching space where students can sit in a more distanced manner. They're also putting up shields for the instructor in all the classrooms, and also thinking about various hybrid models where students might not attend face-to-face, for instance, in a course every class period, but would rotate through so that they would still have some face-to-face matching, and interactions with their instructors. I think, and part of this is, a financial concern. If students decide not to come, although that may not impact us immediately, in some ways it will because of the tuition dollars, but there also is appropriated funding. So trying to balance all that, I think, is extremely difficult. And once again, that's not saying that we're necessarily going to have even that many face-to-face classes by the time fall rolls around. I mean, I think they're basically planning for that mode and hoping that happens. But I think there's also a realization that if the situation doesn't warrant it, that we still could end up in a virtual mode.
So one question I've heard a lot from students is about kind of what happens if classes are in person. Are graduate TAs going to be required to go in there if they don't feel safe, or if they have a pre-existing medical condition? What is the plan for that?
And I will say that plan isn't completely solidified for faculty right now. And my position has been in all the meetings that I've been is that TAs should be treated exactly like other forms of faculty and have the same opt-out abilities and so on that faculty have. I mean, that gets a little bit more difficult in some levels, and I think this is true for faculty as well, in terms of how that all gets doled out. If a department has the balance of face-to-face and virtual, there may be a way to arrange things. But I mean, I have been pushing for the same degree of flexibility to be applied to TAs as anybody else who's required to teach on this campus. How that is going to play out, I'm not exactly sure, and I don't think that that's been decided at the highest level in terms of faculty either. So right now, what's known as research, what we call R&R, which is basically the enrollment group that controls how classrooms are actually doled out to courses, is working on what that matrix looks like for the university as a whole. And obviously that changed dramatically when the shift was from having a maximum of 50 students to 100, and how that then changes that reconfiguration. But my understanding is they're still working on that reconfiguration, which is in part why no one can register right now, is because they basically shut that system down until a matrix is worked out.
So another question I've gotten is that why are professors getting $1,000 bonus per course they teach in the fall semester, but grad instructors are getting a $0 bonus per course?
In terms of that bonus, it's not a per course bonus at all. It was given, it was decided at the highest levels of the administration to give it to 9-month faculty who were teaching courses in the fall, but it's not a per course bonus. They've actually already received it. In part, it was based on the money that the university had available, but ultimately the faculty members are responsible for the ultimate courses that are developed anyways.
So I'm going to move into a very heated question, which is, can we discuss student fees? I know it's always been a contentious issue for graduate students about paying the fees in general, but given what are we expecting in the fall in terms of what services are going to be provided and how will that impact how we pay fees? Yeah,
and I mean, I would say that the final decision on this hasn't been reached. And, you know, as with so many other things, that there's a lot of questions about what's going to be available and how. I think, you know, my understanding is, and, you know, certainly I'd want to hear that if people's experiences are different, but basically, the Student Health Center has pivoted to telehealth, as has the Counseling Center. I believe that those resources are still being readily accessed by students. So I think in many cases where there can be a pivot to a virtual approach, I think those fees will still remain. I don't know about, you know, what will happen, for instance, with things like the rec center. How, you know, are they going to be able to complete that facility? You know, they were operating before, but it would certainly be nice if that new facility is open, and how they're going to practice physical distancing within such an environment. I mean, I could imagine them having sort of sign-up times, or so people might not be able to go exactly when they, but this is just me making something up here. I have not heard about how they're going to try to deal with it. You know, I think there's also certainly going to be questions about the athletics fee. I mean, if football and other things don't happen, will that fee be charged? So I wish I had a better answer for you right now, but at this point, I don't have a complete answer.
And staying on this kind of money fiscal related question line, how will student pay periods change? Will they change? And will we still be seeing our full stipends?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that. That's been made a bit complicated by how, well, basically deciding to start the fall semester a week and a half early. And so what is happening is that anybody who has a summer appointment, and, you know, if you have a year-long appointment, this doesn't apply to you, but if you have just basically, if you're paid by term and your contract is by term, your summer appointment will be ended on August 4th. That said, whatever the contracted amount of the stipend was for the summer, you will be paid that entire amount. So whatever that was will be added to the final paycheck for that summer period. So there'll be no reduction in the total amount that you receive. For the fall semester, you will also be paid the entire amount. But basically, because we're starting earlier, there will be more pay periods to that. And that was a decision made rather than having a gap in students' pay. I mean, we could have ended it in, you know, when the semester ended, and then potentially had, you know, a half-month gap in December. The decision was made that it would be better to have, a continuing income stream rather than cutting it off for a while. So the total amount for the spring semester will be the same, even though we're basically ending classes before and ending finals before that Thanksgiving break. So that's where things stand. So the total amount that people receive will not be changed. I'll also let you know, and we'll be sending out more specific information on this, is that students will be able to pay their fees. Students who are either research assistants or TAs or on fellowships will be able to pay their fees through payroll deduction. I mean, that's up to you if you want to do it that way. But that will spread those payments out over a broader period.
So I'm going to stay on this line of questioning before I switch over, which is, so there's always a potential that COVID-19 comes to campus. I think not necessarily a potential, but an inevitability. What will be happening with the finances in terms of refunding fees, tuition, housing, if that happens?
Yeah, I think, given how much has moved remotely, I would not, and seeing what happened in the spring, I don't know if there would be a refunding of fees. I don't know what the answer is to that. In terms of things like housing, I mean, obviously, if you're in university housing, I mean, last I heard, that's only about 100 grad students total. So not a huge number of the population, but I think they would do, again, the same thing they did in the spring and refund housing costs if they basically remove people from the dorms. That's just my understanding at this point. Once again, I'm pretty sure they would do that, but I haven't heard a definitive answer on that piece.
So how can TAs give input without fearing repercussions? Because obviously that's an issue that we constantly have. How can we be safe and voice our concerns without getting punished? Or
I mean, I think in terms of the research piece, there is sort of and unfortunately, I don't have the exact website in front of me, but there is a place where students can voice their concerns if they see behaviors that aren't conforming to the expectations of how, basically what the requirements are to be doing research. And I think also if they feel pressured into doing research. I would say in terms of TAing, we're trying to work out what that process is, I'll be honest, but certainly people should feel free to contact me if they feel like I hope I'm viewed as a neutral or advocate for graduate students in all this, and I would certainly be more than happy to discuss any issues that any of you are having. Just, drop me a line.
I will briefly plug Dean Harries' ability to be just an excellent voice and someone to listen to. He's truly remarkable in that regard. He's been excellent in handling lots of different situations on campus. So really, if you do have a problem, please reach out to him or report the ethics concern. I will give him the credit where credit is due. I'm going to transition over to my next question, which is, will the graduate school support anti-racist action on campus, including removing the names of white supremacists from our campus and university?
I think the graduate school stands behind that wholeheartedly. I think, the renaming of Daniels Hall that has been announced now is a step in that direction. And, but I also think sort of being anti-racist goes on beyond just the names that are on buildings. I think we need to work to create a graduate culture that is very much attuned to that in everything from the admissions process on through everything else that we do as a university. And I certainly, am not perfect in that area, and I will make mistakes and say the wrong thing, but I am very much dedicated to doing everything that I can to try to work on those various issues. And I've already been talking to folks from the BGSA. I've arranged for them to talk to the whole group of deans, and to me, this is only very much an initial step in something that is going to take a lot of thought, a lot of difficult conversations. And I am certainly dedicated to doing what I can to promote and just work diligently to change the culture. But I need help. I need the input of people. I need to know when I misstep, and also here, hopefully, when we're doing things right. But I think it starts from an effort that we've already started in terms of having programs look at what the GRE might do in terms of impacting the students who are being admitted, but I think also thinking really long and hard about inclusion and how we develop a culture that welcomes those people, understands what they have to contribute, and just, I think ultimately, the more open to diversity we are in all sorts of ways, the better off our programs are in terms of reflecting a wide range of different perspectives, different experiences, and different views. That's the only way we can really create great research and great ideas.
So what specific action items is NC State University, and particularly the graduate school, looking to address, particularly because a number of action items were put forward, including by the Black Graduate Student Association, which Darian did a fabulous job with their statement. I strongly encourage everyone to read that, as well as the 2 petitions going on campus right now.
Yeah, I haven't necessarily seen the 2 petitions yet. In terms of what the BGSA put forward, I think diversity training is going to be a required part of every aspect, and a responsibility of every employee, every faculty member, every student. I mean, it's going to be something that is going to be inculcated across the NC State community. In terms of the grad school efforts, I think, as I was talking about in terms of the GRE, we're going to be spearheading efforts in terms of ultimately having programs rethink what is going on there. One thing that I will say is, we invest a significant amount as a grad school in the recruitment of underrepresented minorities from various, in various ways across the country, and we need to redouble our efforts there. But I think ultimately it's about, and what I'm dedicated to, is to creating a community of these different groups. Because, one of the things that what we need to try to create is this broader sense of community where people can interact and build in a cohesive and a collaborative way with input from others what we need to do. Once again, I certainly don't have all the answers.
So back in 2016, there was a racial climate town hall. There have been a lot of discussions about race and racism on campus, but from a student perspective, no systemic changes have been made within the graduate school. Could you talk about what changes have happened or are well underway at this point in time to address the experience of marginalized groups in their master's, PhD, and professional degrees?
Yeah, I think if you look at our efforts, throughout these past years, there has been a significant effort devoted to, as I said before, in the recruitment realm. I think, the grad school has arranged crosstalks to try to deal with marginalized communities and giving them a voice. We've also been the group that is one of the problems have been that there was very little coordination between what was going on in different groups across campus. And the graduate school has spearheaded bringing all those folks together so that, for instance, the people who run our undergraduate trio program are interacting with the graduate school as well as the various diversity coordinators and associate deans that exist across campus. So we've led this charge, and that really started at the beginning of the past academic year to bring those groups together so that we can have more discussions and so on. So is there more work to do? Yeah, and we've certainly been working hard at thinking about various aspects and how we might continue this dialogue.
So I just want to quickly say that for anyone who hasn't had their question posed yet, I'm very sorry. There are many, many comments in the chat, so I'm working as quickly as I can, and I promise that I will do my best to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered. But I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is, obviously, we need to be listening to people of color, and we've been asking a lot of them in terms of how do we address anti-racism. One student asks, will you be paying people of color when asking for their advice on actions that the university should take to address anti-Blackness on campus?
I mean, I think that's a serious issue. I think obviously the various points that have been raised about the Raleigh police and also the campus police, ultimately I'm part of that conversation, but I'm not. The grad school dean doesn't ultimately control what sort of decisions are made in terms of that. And so I think there will be changes, and hopefully those can be done in a way that really creates a better environment on campus.
So one student points out that conversations of anti-racism and diversity and inclusion cannot be had without addressing how the poverty level stipends and fees that students are forced to live on. So how does the graduate school intend to address either graduate student stipends or fees to make them livable?
Well, I think, as you know, Lexi, and I also see James's picture there, there was a task force that was created to try to deal with fees. I would say that ultimately that wasn't very successful, unfortunately. I don't think it had anything to do with the advocation that existed from the graduate side. I think the stipends is another issue, actually, that I was working on a project with the dean and the associate dean in CHAS looking at how we might address that. And we came up with a process, but unfortunately COVID intervened before we could really push that forward. And, I think at this point, quite frankly, given the economic concerns that are in place, I just don't know whether this is necessarily right now is a time at which the resources exist to address the model that we had created. And I know it's an issue, and it's a thorny one, and I'm not going to shy away from that. And one of the issues is that there is this tension between how many students can you provide some funding to, as opposed to, you could obviously fund fewer students at a higher level. I mean, there's ultimately a budgetary constraint that exists within the entire process. And I think that creates a tension between how you make those decisions and where and ultimately how a department decides to partition out their resources. I mean, it's a department level decision in terms of what that stipend is. That's not something that we dictate from the graduate school.
So another concern that students have is about policing at NC State and on our campus, such as, you know, what systems are in place or what systems is the university looking to put into place to address grievances against university police or with the Raleigh Police Department, because there have been some issues of bias-related incidents by.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that anything that relates to sort of bias is ultimately handled by OIED. You know, if it involves discrimination or harassment, even if it came to my desk, I would be required to send it on to OIED. They are the group that deals with those concerns. And so, I mean, I'm certainly not saying that those issues aren't being considered. And you know, there's already been an announcement of some changes. There's a link to that the chancellor sent out, and I think that will continue.
So a follow-up question to that is, will you, as the dean of the graduate school, pressure campus police to stop carrying deadly weapons on campus?
I will certainly, yeah, I mean, that's my position. You know, what they're ultimately going to decide is beyond my control.
Sorry, I'm just catching up in the chat. There are so many questions, and I'm so grateful for all of the questions that we've gotten today. So one question, and this is coming back a little bit, is going to visas and how visas are being handled this year.
Well, right now, I mean, basically, there are no offices open across the globe by the State Department, as far as I'm aware, to issue visas. So basically, we will have no new international students who are currently outside of the country for the fall. Many of those students have opted already to defer their admission, in most cases for a year. And we will see some new international students, but those will be students who are already studying in the US and simply need to switch their I-20 to NC State. So that is the unfortunate state of things as far as new international students goes.
So another question we've been asked is, there was a memo sent out by Chancellor Woodson encouraging faculty to increase the number of face-to-face classes. What are the college's plans if faculty and departments do not change their plans to increase the number of face-to-face classes?
I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that. There is a faculty town hall with the chancellor on Monday morning, and I'm assuming that those questions will be addressed at that point. I mean, I'm as in the dark as anybody else on those.
So I'm seeing a lot of questions about, will there be some kind of follow-up to this event and what kinds of actions plan on being taken after this town hall is over? Because it's good to talk about things, but it's different to enact them.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the grad school, we're developing plans. I mean, once again, it needs to be a collaboration, and I'm certainly relying on ideas from you all that I don't have. One of the things that I am working on is a program for incoming diverse PhD students to basically build a bridge to graduate school and to engage them in ways that ultimately demystify the graduate experience, but also start that process of building community. I think it's something that is definitely needed. And, we're going to continue to work on that in a wide variety of fronts, working with obviously the leadership of the GSA and the BGSA with input that others have. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers here. And, assistance in terms of how we might do things differently is certainly something that I'm very open to.
So we have a couple more questions, and I'm going to swing back to COVID because I know we got a lot of questions about that earlier, and I just was unable to address them in the moment. So what protocols are in place on campus should there be a COVID-19 outbreak?
I think if there is an outbreak, I mean, depending upon the severity of it, I think ultimately class will go back to the virtual mode. And, we've done that once. I sure hope we don't open only to do that again. But it's super unpredictable.
So what will all of this mean in terms of GSSP funding? I know that some people are bumping right up to the edge of their GSSP eligibility. How will that kind of work for students now?
Yeah, so I mean, that's obviously something that we need to deal with, especially for students who have not been able to get into the lab and have, just given the expectations that are here, haven't been able to complete their work. And I mean, we're working on that process. And I will say that, the GSSP benefits, at least that the graduate school gives, will be extended. But I mean, the one piece that we don't have control of and don't have the resources to backfill are the stipends. That is the trickiest part as far as I'm concerned. And I think, we're having conversations about that, but we haven't had a final decision on how that might be handled.
So in terms of just kind of continuing on that question line, will we be seeing any kind of changes in terms of the tuition, especially since many of us are not going to be able to be on campus?
I think the general thought is that basically if we move to a virtual mode, that the tuition for distance education would be charged. In terms of fees, what that means, that's sort of a tricky part in terms of, if people don't pay the fees and they can't access the services. So how that might work out in terms of what that would be like is unclear to me at this point.
So we actually have a question from a student who'd like to get to raise their hand to speak. So I'm going to allow that to happen. So I'm just going to unmute people. So if you can raise your hand, I will unmute you one at a time. And if you're raising your hand, please bear with me. I'm scrolling. Anyone? Oh, there we go. I'm going to. Hello, Coleman.
Hi, Dean Harries. So I know this has been talked about a little bit, but I don't think there's been a direct question about this. With the chancellor's request that departments create 60% of classes to be face-to-face, what is the graduate school doing specifically to protect grad students from being forced to teach face-to-face when they don't have a lot of power to say no compared to faculty?
Yeah, I mean, I think that once again, what we're trying to do on that front is to ensure that TAs have the same ability to opt out of teaching as faculty do. And, you know, with how that 60% is going to work and what that 60% actually includes is an interesting piece. And I think, you know, the same sort of, I mean, this has also been in for RAs, for people who don't feel comfortable coming onto campus, they have the opt-out component, and hopefully that can be worked out.
Yeah, definitely. I have a follow-up real fast. I know this was a very recent discussion. I got the email last week from the chancellor asking for more face-to-face classes, and got an email from our undergraduate coordinator earlier this week about teaching face-to-face. And so I know there might not be a specific answer right now, but I would really love to see some specific, I'll turn my camera on too, some specific tangible protocol or guidance from the graduate school, because it is one thing to say, yes, please don't make this do that, but when so much of our livelihood and our funding is tied to teaching these classes and are tied to these faculty members that have a lot of control over us, it's really scary to feel like we are being forced to do something when our education and our ability to live and eat and pay rent is tied to people that have control over us.
No, and I certainly am well aware of that power differential, and I certainly realize that exists. And I will say, one of the reasons that the graduate school has been not forthcoming on this is that it hasn't been forthcoming to the faculty in terms of what the process is. And, you know, we've consistently advocated for, I mean, at least in terms of the TA sphere, but, you know, this also goes over into RAs, that those be treated in exactly the same fashion as faculty are. And so I am kind of waiting, I will admit, for what those guidelines are for faculty. And initially it was sort of, you know, the initial element was that faculty could decide. And I certainly lobbied that TAs be treated in exactly that same manner. I mean, the ground has shifted under us a bit in terms of that 60% and now requiring masks and those things. And, you know, and I'm not quite sure, Coleman, to be honest, where that's going to end up. But as soon as it's known for faculty, I'll certainly be advocating that it be applied to graduate students as well.
Okay, that's great.
I wish I had a better answer, but I just don't.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm really lucky to have a supervising instructor that has already committed to me that I can teach in whatever capacity is most comfortable for me. So I'm actually doing all online. But I know not every student has that ability right now. So I want to make sure we're all being protected as much as
Yeah, and I kind of think, you know, that, I mean, that's a dynamic that's probably going to have to play out at the faculty level too, in terms of, you know, what classes are going to be taught in what mode based on the realities that individual faculty members have. And certainly, once again, that needs to be applied to TAs as well. I mean, this 60% has obviously complicated things quite a bit.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next question, and I have one from Narav. I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, it's correct. So my question is related to academics. So if we decide, like as you mentioned earlier, we can the schedule would be flexible, and we would be able to drop our course after the grades are due. So if we decide to do that, will that be reflected on our transcripts or something?
I mean, it will be reflected. The withdrawal will be reflected by a W. Is my understanding. I mean, if it's done before the drop date, it won't be. But if it's done after that, it will be.
Okay, that answers my question. Thanks.
And I will say, you know, based on the data that I got from registration and records, that the drop option or the switch to W option was used much more extensively by undergrads than grads. I think there were only a total of, 72 grad students that actually wanted to drop a course. And a number of those were understandably PE courses. Whereas for undergrads, I think it was 1,300 that dropped courses. So it was certainly disproportionately used by undergrads.
And we have another question from Rebecca. Rebecca? Here we go. Rebecca Scheisler. I'm probably butchering your last name. I'm so sorry. Okay, I will come back to you, Rebecca. Sierra?
Hi, thanks. I just have a quick question. A lot of research has been postponed, understandably so because of COVID-19 restrictions. And I was just curious if you'd heard anything about whether or not the time the graduate students are allowed to finish their PhD, if that's going to be extended or not.
I mean, I think there's two questions wrapped up into this, Sierra. One is the ultimate time limit for a degree, which I think might be different from the question that you're asking. And so the time limits are set at 10 years for a PhD and 6 for a master's. And, we have a pretty well-honed process for extending beyond the 10 years. I think, the piece that you may be asking is in terms of the ability to still get things like GSSP support, and certainly there will be flexibility on that side as well.
Excellent. So we only have another 5 minutes left in our scheduled time. I see a question from Ashley.
Yes, hi. So I think this has been a useful way to spend an hour in some ways. And I think one of the things that I'm feeling is that, like, with regards to student fees, with regards to COVID, with regards to feeling like I'm an essential worker at this university, and yet, like, faculty got a $1,000 bonus while we're still paying $1,300 a semester in student fees. Like, all of that is difficult, and I appreciate your time, Dean Harries. And I was just wondering, and I'm seeing it in the chat, it's not original to me. Is it possible to get a town hall with grad students and people who can give us answers and definitive statements and all that stuff? Because I appreciate you, like, as a liaison between that, and it feels like somewhat frustrating that for the past 4 or 5 months we've been all co-working at home and having to do research and teach and all of this stuff and feeling like somewhat unsupported. And so 1 hour 4 months in feels incredibly frustrating, and that this is happening on top of like some wishy-washy statements from the university on anti-racism and representing people more. Can we get more people who can hear us and do things about, like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that there isn't, as much as everybody would like to be able to give people clear answers on everything, people are still trying to, at every level, trying to work through this. And so, I mean, we'd all love to have definitive answers. I mean, believe me, all of us would. But this situation is just unparalleled and completely unpredictable in terms of where we're going to be.
So I also want to give a point of information for everybody here joining us today. I know that there are still a lot of questions, and unfortunately we are almost out of time, but I'd like to first give Dean Harries a round of applause and thanks so much for doing this with us today. We really appreciate it. we will be having, there will be another town hall next week on Monday at 4 p.m. with the chancellor. So anyone who would like to attend, I strongly encourage you all to go, to be there, to have your questions answered. And I know that the GSA is more than happy to work and create more town hall events if this is something that students want. Dr. Harries, do you have anything to say?
No, I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your schedules to take part in this. You know, I appreciate the numerous people who have raised concerns and asked questions. And, you know, my apologies for not being able to give firm answers on many of the aspects that as a institution we're still grappling with. And certainly I hope that within the near future we have better clarity in terms of all these issues and how we're going to move forward.
I'd like to also turn it over to Darian very quickly. Darian is president of the Black Graduate Student Association. Do you have anything to add in addition? Any closing concerns, questions, comments?
Yeah, I just got a closing remark. I mean, we all know that ain't enough town hall meetings in the world to undo systemic racism. Ain't enough town hall meetings in the world to shoot Rona away. But all of the work that needs to be done is going to happen after we close out of these Zoom meetings. After all of the conversations are done, we're going to see what's really good in the next 3 to 6 months. And none of this stuff is new. So a lot of the questions that are streaming through, whether it's about financial matters, COVID, systemic racism, police brutality, all that good, actually all that terrible stuff, none of this is new. So we all know what's happening. And now we're having conversations about it and we're pointing at the problem, which is beautiful. But now it's also time for action. So after these Zoom meetings are done, we all have a responsibility and we all play a role in everything that's going on.
All righty. Thank you all so much for being here. We so appreciate it. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care, everyone.